Follow the trend, tend to benefit while avoiding harm. Hello everyone, this is Mr. D. Today I want to share with you the images of the 8 trigrams. What are the images of the 8 trigrams? The images here are what we call phenomenon. The images of the 8 trigrams are the phenomenon and objects that the 8 trigrams represent. The 3 lines of the heaven trigram are all yang lines. All the energy contained in the heaven trigram is yang energy. The heaven trigram's yang energy is the purest and most powerful yang energy of the 8 trigrams. The heaven trigram is the father of all things of this world, so it represents the father of a family. All the things with these characteristics are represented by the heaven trigram. Very positive, upward, the most powerful, authoritative, dominant, precious, adamant, etc. This paragraph is a summary of what the heaven trigram represents in our daily life, summarized by ancient Chinese and modern Chinese, based on the characteristics of the heaven trigram and a large amount of divination experiences. The 3 lines of the earth trigram are all yin lines. All the energy contained in the earth trigram is yin energy. The earth trigram's yin energy is the purest and most powerful yin energy of the 8 trigrams. The energy characteristics of the earth trigram and the heaven trigram are completely opposite, and their yin and yang energies work together to produce everything. The earth trigram is influenced by the heaven trigram. The earth trigram obeys the laws of the heaven trigram to produce all things. The earth trigram is the mother of all things, so the earth trigram represents mother. The characteristics of the earth trigram is to be supple and carrying everything. Because the earth trigram's characteristic is supple, so it can absorb all energy. This paragraph is a summary of what the earth trigram represents in our daily life, summarized by ancient Chinese and modern Chinese, based on the characteristics of the earth trigram and a large amount of divination experiences. The lake trigram is composed of 2 yang lines at the bottom and 1 yin line at the top. The things represented by the lake trigram are imaginary at the top, real at the bottom, small at the top, big at the bottom, and defective at the top, soft on the outside and hard on the inside. The lake trigram represents the upward trend of things. The 2 yang lines are like the hard bottom of a lake or swamp, and the yin line above represents water. Because there is only 1 yin line, so it means shallow water. The yang line of the lake trigram is like the bottom of a lake or a swamp, surrounding the water. So the lake trigram has the meaning of restriction. The lake trigram represents the swamp, so it has the characteristic of absorbing energy and easily communicates information with the surrounding things. The lake trigram represents happy. The yin line at the top of the lake trigram represents a weak person, and the 2 yang lines below it represent many capable person, and many capable people support a weak person. Of course, there will be happy in this situation. The lake trigram represents autumn, because autumn is the season of harvest, so the lake trigram represents happy. Because the heaven trigram represents the head, when the yang line at the top of the heaven trigram changes to yin line, it is like a person raising his head to the sky and opening his mouth to the sky and laughing. I have specifically written out 3 reasons why the lake trigram represents happy, just to let you know that when we speculate about the things represented by which one of the 8 trigrams and the 64 hexagrams are based on many aspects. This paragraph is a summary of what the lake trigram represents in our daily life, summarized by ancient Chinese and modern Chinese, based on the characteristics of the lake trigram and a large amount of divination experiences. The wind trigram is composed of 2 yang lines at the top and 1 yin line at the bottom. The wind trigram represents a yin energy sneaking under the yang energy. This is a downward movement trend and a development trend from the outside to the inside. The wind trigram represents some things with the characteristics of fluttering, penetrating, and extruding. Because wind is pervasive, the characteristics of this trigram are very similar to wind, so the wind trigram represents wind. This is also the origin of the name of this trigram. The wind trigram means that no matter how small a gap is in something, it can exist in something and move in it. Because the wind trigram has the characteristics of fluidity, so it represents the flow of energy. The wind trigram represents wood because the roots of trees have the characteristic of growing downward. Because the wind trigram represents the downward movement trend, so it represents straight lines, ropes, and threads. The wind trigram represents craftsmen and work, because carpenters use thread or rope to make straight wood. This paragraph is a summary of what the wind trigram represents in our daily life, summarized by ancient Chinese and modern Chinese, based on the characteristics of the wind trigram and a large amount of divination experiences. The fire trigram is composed of 2 upper and lower yang lines and 1 yin line in the middle. The fire trigram represents the trend of energy development from the center to the outside. The fire trigram represents the exchange of internal and external energy, like a flame, which releases energy from the center to the outside. The fire trigram represents things that are full of movement trends on the outside and static on the inside. The flame is attached to combustible materials, and when the flame burns, it must be directed to spread around. So the fire trigram means discrete. The fire trigram represents fire, sun, and electricity, so it has the meaning of shining, bright, and beautiful. The fire trigram represents things that are hard on the outside and soft inside, such as turtles, crabs, shellfish, soldiers' armors and hats. If we think of the fire trigram as a person's body shape, it represents a person with a big belly. This paragraph is a summary of what the fire trigram represents in our daily life, summarized by ancient Chinese and modern Chinese, based on the characteristics of the fire trigram and a large amount of divination experiences. The water trigram is composed of 2 upper and lower yin lines and 1 yang line in the middle. The water trigram represents the trend of energy movement from the surrounding to the center. When the water is flowing, no sharp knife can cut off the water. This shows the characteristics of the water trigram. It is soft on the outside and hard on the inside. The water trigram represents things whose internal energy is full of moving trends and external energy is static. Because one yang light falls into the two yin lights in the water trigram, and the symbol of the water trigram resembles a big pit, so the water trigram has the meaning of falling into a trap. Because water can penetrate anywhere, so the water trigram has a meaning of hide. This paragraph is a summary of what the water trigram represents in our daily life, summarized by ancient Chinese and modern Chinese, based on the characteristics of the water trigram and a large amount of divination experiences. The thunder trigram is composed of two yin lights at the top and one yang light at the bottom. The thunder trigram represents a tendency for energy to develop upward or outward. The yang energy below the thunder trigram vibrates the yin energy above, just like everything starts to grow in spring. The yin energy above thunder trigram is stirred by the yang energy below. Because the yin energy is disturbed, so the thunder trigram has the meaning of turbulence. The thunder trigram represents that the yang energy below doesn't want to be surprised by the yin energy above, and the yang energy rises to oppose the yin energy above. The thunder trigram represents not sticking to the rules. Someone don't want to lag behind, and going forward courageously. Therefore, the thunder trigram implies that someone takes the initiative to do something. This paragraph is a summary of what the thunder trigram represents in our daily life, summarized by ancient Chinese and modern Chinese, based on the characteristics of the thunder trigram and a large amount of divination experiences. The mountain trigram is composed of two yin lights at the bottom and one yang light at the top. In the mountain trigram, there is less yang energy on the upper and more yin energy on the lower. This is like an object that is small on the top and large on the bottom. This feature is very similar to a mountain, so the mountain trigram represents a mountain. The mountain trigram represents that when the thing develops to its apex, we must be cautious at that time, because if things continue to develop, they will develop in the opposite direction. So the mountain trigram represents a downward development trend. The mountain trigram represents obstacles, difficulties, because when we climb a mountain, it is very hard and laborious. Because the symbol of the mountain trigram is a yang light at the top, it's like an obstacle blocking all the energy of upward movement. So the mountain trigram represents stagnation. The mountain trigram represents things that are real on the surface, empty on the inside, and real on the top, and empty on the bottom. The mountain trigram represents the door, because it has one yang light on the top and two yin lights on the bottom. This image is very similar to that of a door. This paragraph is a summary of what the mountain trigram represents in our daily life, summarizes by ancient Chinese and modern Chinese, based on the characteristics of the mountain trigram and a large amount of divination experiences. Please don't memorize what the 8 trigrams represents by rote, but understand why the 8 trigrams represents those things. Subscribe. Be your own prophet.